Are you tired of always going bankrupt? Well, your luck's in today, because I have for you 10 tips on how to start your career as a computer tycoon and stay in business. Hi, my name is Ajaxpost, and today I'm going to give you a number of tips which will hopefully help you build a good foundation for your business in Computer Tycoon and prevent you going bankrupt in those first difficult early years. Once you've got the foundation set, you should be ready to go and take over the world. First though, a bit of a disclaimer. I have been playing the game for years and I am now on my 5th series of Let's Play videos for the game. And so rather than having you sit through all of those over and over again, I thought I would condense what I know into one hopefully fairly simple, straightforward set of hints and tips for getting you going. Now, I play the game in a particular slow and steady fashion. I'm not an aggressive, all-out go-getter player, so my strategy might not suit the way that you play the game, but either way, the tips I think I have for you today will get you going whichever style you choose to take. The game comes with 3 map modes for playing in. We're going to be working on the historical map, which has a number of features to it, which make the game that bit much more interesting, I think. But these tips should apply whichever of the map modes you use. The randomized post-2000 borders, which is a set world map. The simplified map, which is more about regions of the world rather than individual countries. And the historical map, which starts in 1974 with the borders of countries of that time, and those borders can change and countries change their political and economic status. Starting off your new game, it doesn't really matter who you choose here, but I do recommend, if you're unfamiliar with this title, it's probably best to start in beginner mode and possibly normal if you're willing to take on the challenge. But it probably is a good idea to start in the beginner mode, which gives you a slight edge over the AI competition. So it gives ourselves a name. The avatars here are just avatars. They don't impact particularly on who you are as a leader of the company. We'll get into that in a moment. The first thing you want to choose though is the bonus that you get, as to whether you get an advantage or a cost saving in terms of researching new technologies, producing, manufacturing your computers and hardware, or logistics, being able to expand and sell into many countries. To be honest, I'm not sure if this is terribly significant. It depends on which strategy you take into the game. But I tend to go for a research bonus, because research, certainly in the early game, is expensive. But then again, the only way to succeed in the game is to sell lots of computers, in which case both production and logistic bonuses are a good strategy likewise. So here we go with tip number 1, and it should be obvious. I will always recommend in a game as complex as this that you actually do follow the tutorial. It's much improved since the earliest versions of this early access game. One caveat I would put on the tutorial, however, is that it is quite strict and it does expect you to follow the guidance provided. It does point at the options to choose and gives a fairly good description of why you would choose those options. But if you decide to go off course somewhat, go off piste, then you may find yourself getting a little bit stuck in the tutorial and having to click around to get out of it again. It is possible to get out, that's not a real problem, but it can cause a little bit of frustration if you're not quite sure what's going on. So do pay attention to what it's telling you here, what it's pointing at, and following the tutorial fairly closely. Once you've done with the tutorial, there is a good deal of on-screen help. A lot of the dialog boxes will have a question mark on them. There'll also be hover over tooltips on many of the sliders and decision making points, so always look out for those and they will give you useful information. So here we get into tip number 2, which is all about managers. When you start the game, you have to define your particular attributes in terms of all the skills for management that you will need, and also those of your partner. Notice there are 2 of you in this startup company garage. The avatar itself at this point in the game doesn't make any difference as to your skills and attributes. There are plans further down the line as the game develops further that the avatar you choose may well have more of an impact at this stage. But for the time being, we're choosing our skills by rolling our particular attributes. And what you're looking for here, certainly at the early stages of the game, is those skills which will be most useful in safeguarding the starting of your company. And for those, I would recommend manufacturing, which means you'll get more manufacturing out of your factories for less. Logistics, which will mean you can sell into more countries for less cost. Being able to sell to more countries is vital in the early stages of the game. Another one is research. I tend to go for research because of the way I play the game, because research is actually quite expensive and you do need to keep abreast of technology to ensure that you don't fall behind your competitors in the game. Another valuable skill here actually is charisma, because when you start the game you'll only have two managers, you and your partner, who we'll come to in a moment, and you'll then need to hire other managers to fill various roles in the company. And the higher your charisma is, the more chance you will have of finding another manager. It can be very frustrating spending several months looking for a manager and coming back empty-handed. So let's roll this until we're happy with a choice of skills, or a selection of skills that are useful to us. A lot of people talk about accounting as a great skill to have, and it is, but I think for the first stage of the game I don't think it's key. That's just the way I play the game. Okay, now these look like reasonable skills to go with. I've got good charisma and I'm fairly good at manufacturing, so I should get more out of my factories for less money, as that tooltip tells us. So let's done and select my manager. Now the tutorial will next take you into creating the hardware required to build your very first computer. That's kind of a dummy before you get into actually running your company and selling real computers. I'm going to skip that and move straight on to the next part of the sort of manager's tip, which is your partner. As you see, there are two of us here in this little garage starting up our little company. Now your partner is someone else you cannot fire as well, so he's a permanent member of your management team, and the thing to be aware of here is to make sure their skills complement yours. So we've come into this game with good manufacturing and reasonable charisma skills as well. So you want someone who will fit and to be good at one of the other key technologies here: research, manufacturing or logistics, which you didn't have as a CEO. So we'll roll through these and find someone who is good at, or you're really good at logistics. That's handy. Also, really good at loyalty. Now the loyalty is a key thing here. A higher loyalty means they are less likely to ask for extortionate wages. So as it says on the tooltip, they will get smaller salary rises per year. If you have a manager with a very low loyalty, they will eventually, over the decades they work for you, cost you an absolute fortune. So you want to minimize management costs as well as all your other costs. So bear in mind the loyalty of your partner, because they will always be with you. So here we can see this guy doesn't have charisma or manufacturing, but he is great at logistics. So I think he'll be an ideal partner for our business. And on to tip number 3. And this is when you're building your first computer. And the tutorial will take you through this, but it stands alone as a good piece of advice anyway, I reckon, is don't always go for the biggest and the best to start with. Certainly not for your very first computer, because at this point in the game, you're not sure who you are selling to or how good your competitors are going to be, how good the AI companies are going to be. The thing to notice here is the cost in PP. That is the production power or production points needed to build each individual component, and they will accumulate into the total production cost of your computer. Now each factory has a total production capacity in terms of what is called PP here, and if you have higher costing computers, you'll be able to produce fewer of them to sell in your factories. Factory expansion we'll talk about later, but bear in mind you don't want to get too carried away producing something awesome to begin with if you don't need it to beat your competition. So start with something fairly modest and don't go too far ahead of the basic PP cost. You may not see a cost in dollars here to start with because you don't have any factories at this point in the game when we first start. We'll come on to that and we'll see those costs change as we get into the game. So don't get too carried away with your hardware components when you build these, because bear in mind each new component you build will have a sort of design and prototyping cost. So you'll have to pay that out of your budget each time you design a new piece of hardware. So don't get too carried away to start with, keep your costs down, And let's see then, once we get into the marketplace, how well our machine stacks up against the opposition. I'm now in my current running game. We're about a year or so into the game, and I just want to show off here what I mean about comparing your machine against the opposition. So this is my computers, this is all of them. I can deselect all the ones that aren't currently on sale and just pick the ones that are on market. And this is how my computer stacks up. But how does that compare to the opposition? If I just enable any or all of these competitors, you can see how it stacks up, and each of these columns can be sorted. So if I want to sort by performance, I can do that here. So the top performing machine, the highest number, is in fact mine. So here what you can see is your machine against the opposition, and we can see here that I basically am competitive in most things apart from this thing called prestige. Now every country you sell into will have different requirements in terms of capacity, performance, feature set, prestige and so on. So depending on which countries you're selling into, whether you're best in this particular criteria or not may not be significant. But if you start with a really powerful top quality machine, you may be way ahead of the competition, but the competition is so far behind you didn't need to spend all that money to start with. So bear in mind, start relatively safe, and once you've got into the market, then you can determine where to go to from there. In terms of the countries you're selling into, you can see all this on the world map. If I look at the countries that I sell into, like Saudi Arabia here, you can see on this graph here what they prefer in terms of the aspects, the criteria, the attributes of your computer. So looking for quality, for feature set and performance, less so ease of use. The other criteria don't matter to the Saudis at all, whereas in Brazil, slightly different thing. Quality, features, these things are all balanced out in different ways across each of your markets. So depending on which country you're selling, you may not need the most powerful computer in terms of performance because nobody's worried about that. You can also see all that data on the market list here, and you see all these the icons here, and again you can sort them so you can see who wants a feature set, or a feature rich computer, or a performance fast computer, whatever. So there's lots of information here which you can make use of to judge how good your machine needs to be in any particular characteristic. For tip 4, we're going to look at your sites, where you're going to build your computers and where you're going to do your research. This is covered in the tutorial, and it is significant if you want to control your costs, which you do. Trust me, you need to keep your costs as low as possible. So the tutorial recommends that you start your first factory in a very poor or poverty wealth country. You can see the wealth of countries on the map by using this icon, or you can use the market list again to sort your markets, your countries, into wealth order. And why do you want to go into a very poor country, a poverty wealth country for your factory? Because you automatically get a 50% discount on the daily cost of running that factory in that country. If you have a manager with a manufacturer bonus, you'll also get an additional discount because of that bonus, and they will also increase your productivity, your capacity for producing computers. So again, aligning a manager with your site is a good thing. So that's the factories. Always build them in as poor a country as you can. That's the site. It's not necessarily where you're selling your computer. Likewise, your laboratory should be in a filthy rich country, like in this case Ireland, because in a rich country you will get a 30% discount on the daily cost of your laboratories, and laboratories research is expensive in this game, so always pay account of your research costs. Because I selected my starting bonus as a research bonus when I started this game, I'm also getting an extra 20% discount because of that. Likewise, if you chose a logistics or a manufacturing bonus to start the game, you'll get a similar discount on those buildings within your company. That applies across every site. And why wouldn't I want to put a factory on this rich country site? Because a factory would have a 50% increment, an increase in the daily cost on this rich site. Likewise, a laboratory in a very poor site will cost you more, 30% more. So do be aware that you will need two types of site, certainly in the early game. The other aspect of this site, I mentioned it just a moment ago, is managers. As you can see here in my rich country Ireland, where my laboratories are, or my laboratory is, I also have a manager bonus, and that's because in my office I selected a skill for my manager, or a task for my manager, to do research. Now, research is one of the passive tasks. These passive tasks are jobs you assign your managers to do at particular sites, which basically go on until you discontinue that task or that activity. So here I want this manager who's really good at research. He's got a 60 grade there. I want him to do research, which is a passive task, and I'll assign him to my countries where I do have expensive research labs, which in this case is Ireland, so I will delegate the manager to take that on, and there he is. I now get a research bonus of 60%. Likewise, I've also in this game now got a logistics skilled manager, so I've put him in my Peru location where he's building up my logistics site. So I'm getting that, more logistics points, which we'll come to in a moment, and they're costing me less. And talking of logistics, you will need to build logistics offices. I would recommend in every site that you have opened. I have one here, and also an office. Why would you build these two buildings? The logistics is useful because that will help you sell into as many countries as possible for as little as possible. If you don't have as many logistics offices as you need, you will incur a penalty, so that will add to your costs. And you can see up here, in fact, that I do now have a penalty because I don't have enough logistics offices to support the number of countries that I'm selling into. The office is a very good building, certainly the first couple of levels in any site, because that gives you a discount on every building that you have on that site. So I've got a level 2 office here, which means I get a 20% discount on every building in this site. Another building which I recommend putting on every site is the marketing building, which is the television icon here. They don't cost a great deal to run on a day-to-day basis, but they will help you reduce your marketing costs. And marketing costs are a big thing. We'll get into those as we go through these tips. On to tip 5. We've now got sites for our computer. We have designed our first computer. Where are we going to sell it? Again, covered in the tutorial. But important to keep in mind is you want to sell as many computers as you can for as much as you can. And if we look at our computers, I am pricing it very expensively, to be honest, and this is a recommendation from the tutorial, which actually works by and large. It may not be the same throughout the rest of your game, but certainly for the first couple of computers, it doesn't hurt to use the same settings as recommended in the tutorial. I'm discounting my machine so that poorer countries can afford to buy them. Ideally, I want to sell my computers, however, to rich people because they will pay the full price. So the first thing you want to do, tip number 5, sell to rich people. How do you know who the rich people are? Again, the wealth map will tell you that. So the USA is a rich country. Apparently, Norway is filthy rich, as is the Republic of Ireland and a few other countries around the world. You can also see them on the market list. Again, just sort them by the wealth column and you can see them here. Now the thing is, of course, is you want to sell as many computers as you can to as many rich people as you can. So you will want to find larger countries with a reasonably high population to sell into. In the first year or two of the game, you don't need to sell into poor countries. Avoid them. You're just giving money away at that point. Unless you've already built somehow a really large factory and manufacturing capacity, you'll never meet the demand in those poor countries. Which brings me on to the other point here. Don't go to really big countries to start with, because every country you sell into, you're going to be marketing your computers to every member of the population. You'll be putting, in a sense, a flyer in front of every one of them. And to do that costs money. And the more flyers you have to create, the more costs are involved for you. So don't get too carried away by going somewhere enormous like the USA or Brazil or India, somewhere like that immediately, because unless you have a factory that is big enough to sell all your computers to all those people, you'll often find your manufacturing costs far outweigh the profit you get from selling your computers, those few computers you're making, to all those people. Now, having picked a country that you want to go into to open up its market, on the larger countries you'll have the option to put in multiple logistics points, and as you can see, the more logistics points you put in, the reseller will take less of a cut of your profits. However, bear in mind, in the early stages of the game, the key thing is to sell as many computers as you can to as many people as you can. If you can do that, you'll generally find that the tax charged on you selling into that country isn't quite so important at this stage of the game. So when you're first opening up a market, just put in one logistics point. And you can do that, as it says there, just by pressing the A key or selecting one on this slider here. If you are particularly worried about tax, then just do a search around, particularly on the market list, which is very helpful for this. And you should be able to find a country which has a reasonable population and a reasonably acceptable taxation rate. And just put your logistics point into that. If you're playing the historical map, there will be regime change. Now, at the beginning of the 1970s through into the 80s, there are a number of countries like the USSR, like China, Cuba and so on, which you cannot sell into because those are closed communist markets. But if you're at all familiar with your history, you may be aware that other countries move into communism. If you invest logistics points and sites in those countries, you will lose them when they turn communist. They take control of all the assets of all the companies that were in there. You will not get anything back. So if you know your history, you can use that to your advantage to avoid making costly investment mistakes. For tip number 6, we're going to look at the pricing of your computers. The tutorial recommends starting with quite a high price of 8,000 and then quite deep discounts to attract customers in these poorer countries. But as we've discussed, you should try and avoid selling to poorer people for as long as you can, basically, and make the most of the richer countries to make most profits. A higher price with a lower discount means more profit. For your first computer, you're likely to find that you don't have a large enough manufacturing capacity, you don't have enough big factories available to you to produce enough computers to sell to the countries that you're selling into. In this case, your DPP in the top right here will be significantly more than your PP, your production power points here. Now in that case, you don't need to reduce your price at all. It'd be foolish to reduce your price because there's no way you can sell them, because you're simply not producing enough into those countries. Likewise, if that's the situation, don't bother expanding at that point. You don't need to sell into more countries because you don't have any spare computers to sell to them. So keep your price high, keep your discounts low, and leave it like that. If the situation changes, as it has here, where I have more capacity than I have demand, then there are a couple of things that you can do. You can reduce your price, but I would always be cautious of doing that, particularly if the numbers are fairly balanced, because A, you won't make as much money, and B, some AI companies will respond and reduce their prices. And the one thing you don't want to do is get into a price war, because the AI will often be quicker and, dare I say it, smarter than you, and take advantage of those price cuts more effectively. What you can do, alternatively, is to change your marketing. Now, marketing we have spoken about briefly before, but let's look at this in a little bit more detail for tip number 6. When you start off marketing your computer, there will initially be a very high demand for it. So I would recommend, as the tutorial suggests, selling it to casuals. Leave all these performance focused sliders at important in the middle ground here. Don't worry too much about the channel focus, and use only a base, or at best a small marketing campaign. And certainly for the first few days at least, you will have huge demand and not enough capacity to supply all that. However, as demand tails off and you have more computers stocking up in your warehouses, rather than reducing your prices, you could try increasing your marketing campaign. Now that of course will incur extra marketing costs, and as we've discussed before, larger countries that you're selling into will increase substantially your market costs, and this is where those marketing buildings can come in handy. I've got a marketing bonus here of 3% because I have 3 marketing offices, one on each of my 3 sites around the world. So they will save me, in this case, nearly $32,000, which is a nice daily saving. Final thing on this marketing screen here, a month after you release a new computer, you'll get one extra hint on the marketing page here as to how effective parts of your campaign have been. So this, I've been selling 2 computers now, so I've got 2 hints, one for each one, and it's come back and told me that features are important to my customers, my casual customers, and also prestige. So when I create my next computer, I can increase the importance in the marketing campaign of those 2 aspects of my machine. Tip 7 is all about research. I have one research site at the moment, my filthy rich country of Ireland, which has a level 1 lab on it. Research is vital. However, research is expensive. So be cautious of expanding too quickly into research if you don't have the sales reach, if you cannot sell enough computers to cover the cost of all that research. Ways of reducing the cost of research: obviously go into the richest countries you can to and build a site there, and you should then get this discount based on the country wealth on your laboratory. If you've selected the research bonus when you started the game, you'll get that here, as you can see I have. Also, building an office will help reduce the costs of your laboratories. Offices, as we've said, reduce the costs of all buildings on the site by 10% per level of your office building. Also, if you've got a good research manager, they will not only boost the output of your research labs, they will also reduce the costs. The manager I've assigned here to Ireland has a 60% rating in research, so I get a 60% uplift in the research done, and also a 60% reduction in the cost of that research. So it's an awesome benefit. So get good managers as quickly as you can. One thing I will also say here, we'll cover this more generally in the next tip, is that making your laboratories larger on any individual site will cost you a lot. They become more expensive per research point as they go up in the levels. So if I wanted to increase this laboratory to level 2, I will get double the amount of research, but the cost will be more than double per day. So it'll go up from over 200,000 a day for 1.6 research points. It'll go up to over 500,000 for 3.2 research points, which, if you've got the sales to cover it, is fine. But if you haven't, that's a quick way into bankruptcy. And we'll cover building costs in a moment in tip number 8. However, staying on the research tree in the game is, well, it's large. But as we've discussed before, it's a good idea to keep your eye on your opponents and see what they are ahead of you on, if anything, in terms of computer attributes. So if you're behind in performance, you may be looking for a performance improvement in terms of research, likewise capacity or features or whatever, that you'll get a bonus from any particular research. And my preferred way of doing that is to use the queue here. Now, this can be sorted like pretty much every other table in the game by just clicking on this line behind the icon. I tend to keep it in sorted research cost order, so I can see which of the cheapest research is I can do, so I can get those done quickly and get those out of the way. But it also tells me here what the benefit is for each of these characteristics of each individual technology. So the fax here, an accessory, will give me 5 feature points, but it will add 15 to my production cost in production points, whereas a composite monitor will add a lot of prestige points, feature sets. It'll make the machine easier to use, but it will cost me 25 production points, which is actually quite a good deal, but it will take me 300 research points to research, and I'm only doing 1.6 research points per day. And again, to help you decide which research to focus on, also keep an eye on the markets. As we noted earlier, each market has a different priority in terms of what types of attribute they're keen on. And if you can focus on a few of those to start with, certainly an early game, then that will help you keep your costs down and maximize your research output. And a final thing to say on this research area is don't rush into creating new hardware components or building brand new computers each time you discover a new technology. Get a few together first in a nice little bundle, which you can then use to create a computer which has improvements in several areas of its characteristics and attributes. Because each time you create a new component for your computers, there will be an upfront cost to designing and prototyping that hardware component. So that will take money out of your bank balance. Likewise, when you're building a new computer, Once you've put all the components together to create this new and even better machine, you will then need to go into testing it and releasing it, and that will be a substantial upfront cost as well. This upfront cost can be quite a lot. For tip 8, to avoid going bankrupt, keep an eye on your sites and keep an eye on your costs of all the buildings on those sites. We've already seen, build your research labs in rich countries, build your factories in poverty or poor countries, but build offices and logistics buildings in all of them to help spread the cost and allow you to get out as cost effectively as possible to as many countries as possible. The thing to bear in mind here about factories and research labs is the change in costs per unit as they level up. A factory will become cheaper per unit of production as you level it up. So although the costs will be substantial, for example, this factory in India is currently level 2, costing me 768,000 a day for 500,000 production points per day. If I take this up to level 3, it will cost me nearly 7 million a day, but it will give me 5 million research points. So that's quite a boost in my manufacturing capacity. Conversely, a research lab will get that much more expensive as you level it up. So you will certainly want to have a research manager available to you to keep those costs down. And that also means for research labs, it can be in the early game more cost effective to have a few rich sites with a few low level research labs, as opposed to factories where you have perhaps fewer sites but more higher level factory. One other thing to bear in mind is when you're leveling up some of these buildings, like logistics and like factories, you do need support buildings. So for higher level logistics offices, you will need higher level offices to support that. So to get to a level 2 logistics office, which gives me 4 logistics points, I actually needed to increase my office to level 2. Likewise for factories, once you get to level 3, you will need to start building recreation areas to support those higher level factories. So you'll need to bear in mind that additional costs. And that's why having offices on all your sites, higher level offices as well on all of your sites, helps, because they will reduce the costs across all the buildings on that site. So the more buildings you need to level up, also level up your offices. If you do find at any one point that your costs are running away with you, there are a few buildings here where you can actually reduce the daily cost of those buildings. And you'll see sliders here for logistics, for research labs, for factories, and also for marketing. And what this means is that I can reduce the costs of those buildings on that site. You can see the daily cost going down here, but that does mean I reduce their output. So at 10,000 a day, I'm only getting 1 logistics point from that building, as opposed to 4 logistics points for 40,000. One thing to bear in mind on the factories, however, is that since the managers and offices update of February 2022, is that they now self-regulate their output. So if the game finds that you are not selling enough, then it will automatically reduce the output and therefore reduce your costs of the factories. Now there are a couple of caveats to that. The main one is that you do have a stockpile. Every logistics office you open increases the stockpile of unused production points from your factories. So this is like a warehouse full of components which you haven't been able to sell yet. So the factories will attempt to meet all your demand and likewise fill your stockpile of spare parts which you're not selling. Once that's happened, then manufacturing will cease and you will not be paying costs for your factory output at that point. However, if demand then picks up and all your stockpile is used and you do need to start producing again, then your factories will burst into life. You will start being charged for them again, but they will start outputting as per normal. The slider on the factory here in this case reduces the maximum output of that factory. It's not the actual daily output, it is the maximum possible from that factory. So if you do have very large factories, but you have nowhere near the demand to meet that supply, then you can set a temporary maximum and say, actually I don't need to to ship 5 million units because my maximum demand is only ever going to be 3 million. So you could reduce that factory output there as a way of saving costs until you expand into larger markets. On to tip number 9, and that is, if you're not selling a computer, don't bother marketing it. As soon as you get more than one computer on the market, your marketing costs will rocket. So unless both computers are selling well and making a profit, then you're going to be losing money and heading surely into bankruptcy. So I now have two home computers here, and I will release my second one, and we will see that the marketing costs for my machines have now significantly increased. And now, because I have 2 home computers on sale, I'm getting an extra cost to marketing of 16%, which can be substantial and enough to reduce the profits that I'm making from the machine that is actually selling. Now, it is possible to have more than one computer on the market at the same time, particularly if they service 2 different types of user. So for example, if you're selling one which is very high performance or is very quiet, so suits a gamer or an office worker as opposed to the casual consumer, then you may make money out of both of them. But bear in mind that if they are very similar, which is what I tend to do, to be honest with you, then one will sell, the other one won't. You'll get a little bubble popping up here saying one of your machines isn't selling at all, so you should take it off the market because you're going to be losing money. Now, that marketing uptick rule applies to machines of the same type. So if you've got more than one home computer, you'll get a marketing increase. If you've got more than one personal computer, you'll get a marketing increase. But if you have one home computer and one personal computer, they are separate marketing budgets, so you won't get that increase on the marketing costs of any one individual computer. So what you would do is, if you're not selling enough of the older computer, is simply go into release and archive it, and that will take it out of the marketing equation altogether. You'll lose that 16% increase in marketing costs, and everyone can then start buying your fabulous new computer. And finally, tip number 10 on avoiding bankruptcy is, don't worry about avoiding tax. In the early game, you should be able to pick enough moderately sized countries, rich enough countries, to sell enough computers to keep going into profit to allow you to progress further and start making real money with much more complex and expensive computers. So one strategy suggested by a number of players is, if you're going into a country like the US of A, which has a huge marketplace, how many people are there? 218 million. That's going to be a huge marketing cost to start with. And as you can see here, the sales tax is quite high, as the reseller cut is also moderately high as well. Whereas in the United Kingdom, it's even higher for a much smaller country. What you can do here, as we've said before, is you can increase the number of LP points in there to reduce the reseller cut, but the reseller cut shouldn't have a big impact on your profits, to be honest, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. If you want to sell into really rich countries with high tax rates, there are a couple of effective ways of reducing that tax bill. The best way of avoiding high tax is to get an accountant. Hire a manager with a good accounting skill, and that will reduce the amount of tax you pay in that country if that country has a site. So if I wanted to sell into the United States and reduce the tax burden on my sales, I would also have to spend money to build a site in that country, at which point I could then assign a manager to run the site, and that would reduce by whatever percentage that particular skill is, that can reduce the tax rate by that amount. But to be honest, it's all about selling computers, not reducing the tax on them at this stage of the game. Another way of effectively reducing taxes over time actually happens automatically. If we go to a country and click on the Market Information tab here, this actually explains what happens. If you have a large level 3 factory or a very large level 4 laboratory, and you keep them running at full budget throughout the year, you will start earning points, as it were, with the government of that country, and they will then start reducing your tax permanently for that country. So in this case, if I have a factory, a level 3 factory running at least 60% budget throughout an entire year, it must be the whole year, my tax rate in this country will be reduced by 1% per year up to a maximum of 30%. Though the sales tax will never actually reduce to under 5%. My basic strategy is to find larger, richer countries with modest tax rates to keep your marketing costs at a reasonable level and hopefully sell lots of computers into them. And I find a bonus little tip here for an emergency situation where you are facing bankruptcy but just need a little short-term help to get you over a shortage of finances. If you look at your budget for your company here, there is an icon here for taking out a loan. So what could be happening is that you could have been losing money for several months and you're in the red, or you simply don't have enough money to actually test and release your latest computer, which will take the world by storm. So what you can do is take a loan for a short amount of time to get you over that hump until your new computer takes the world by storm, sells in its millions, and gets you back into profit. So if you are about to hit bankruptcy, you just don't have quite enough money to get you to the next stage of your company's development, then a loan is available. But obviously do remember that you will be paying them off for a number of years. And so that's it. My top tips for surviving the early years in Computer Tycoon. Most importantly, avoiding bankruptcy as your company gets off the ground, and setting a solid foundation for growth into the future, and eventually taking over the world and bankrupting all your opponents. Now, as I said at the top of the video, I play in a certain way. I'm fairly slow and steady in the way I develop and expand my companies, but I know there are other players who take a much more aggressive and expand much more quickly approach to the game, and have also been very successful and have won quite quickly in the early years of the game and wiped out the opposition fairly swiftly. That works. It's a fairly high risk strategy, but if you know what you're doing, then it is possible to do that. By all means, go to the Discord server, go to the Steam forums, watch other people play the game, and you'll find other ways of playing it and get some great tips from there as well. My approach is just one, but it works for me, and if you're new to the game, I reckon it could work for you and introduce you into what is, after all, a very fine strategy game, and you'll have hours and hours of guaranteed fun. So from me, Ajaxpost, thank you very much for watching this. I hope you've enjoyed this and have got some useful information out of it, which will help you enjoy this game of Computer Tycoon. If you have, it'll be great to hear from you. A little bit of a like would be lovely. Click on the old thumbs up button. Even better though, if I've got anything wrong, and as I said, I'm no real expert at the game, I just managed somehow to be successful at it when I played it, and I have in my particular play style. If I've got anything wrong, or if you've got any comments or any other questions, then please do drop them down in the comments below. That would be awesome to hear from you. And of course, if you've not already subscribed to my channel, then you could do that now, and that way you'll know when I upload another one of these or any of my other Let's Play series. Well, from me, Ajaxpost, here in Computer Tycoon, until the next time, bye bye for now.